Okay, good day everyone. For today, we're going to talk about gender and sexuality as we discuss what we call the sexual self. Okay, so I guess that most of you were able to listen to my discussion about the physical self. Basically, this is the extension of that discussion. And for today, we're going to adapt the lenses of biology, culture, and psychology in understanding factors that influence gender, sexual self, and the sexual selfhood. So let's begin. Before we begin with our main discussion, first let's try to ponder upon these guide questions so that you will know the reason why we're talking about this topic in understanding the self. Okay? Even though this topic does not only center on physical and sexual self, we decided to include this topic as one of our discussions so that we can raise awareness. Okay, but in order for you to know more about these topics, okay, I would suggest that you also have to read materials on your own. Okay, you have to also to seek out other sources of information, because in this discussion I only aim to give an overview of the very wide field, okay, of gender and sexuality. We are barely scratching the surface in this discussion, because when it comes to gender and sexuality, there are a lot of perspectives to consider, and there are a lot of research topics that are out there, and it would be impossible to cover all of them in just a very short discussion. But nonetheless, in this overview discussion, I want us to reflect on the following. The first is, why do sexual topics create discomfort when discussed in public? If you're familiar with Sigmund Freud, I hope that you remember that according to him we have two drives, the sex and aggression, and a lot of people would say that his theory is outdated because he only used the term sex and aggression because during their time it's something that is taboo. Okay, during their time, which I will discuss later in one of our discussions, okay, it wasn't considered for the people to discuss about sexual matters in public. That's why Freud hypothesized that maybe deep inside we are motivated to seek either sexual pleasure or aggressive behavior. Okay, because back then it wasn't accepted in the society for you to talk about these things in public. Okay, but in our culture, I can still say that it's still considered undesirable. It's still considered a taboo in our society to talk about these things, mainly because of the influences from our ancestors, from religion, from our beliefs, and these things make us conservative. Okay, but our our beliefs influence us to the extent that we do not we no longer want to talk about these things, although we are doing it for scientific purposes. Okay? And talking about these matters in public makes one look like that he or she is trying to um, talk about things that are not meant to be discussed. Hence, that person is going to be labeled as someone who doesn't know how to behave properly. Hence, it causes discomfort to talk about this in public. Okay? And I hope you remembered from one of our discussions that one of the groups that a Filipino belongs to is the barkada, or the circle of friends. According to Filipino social psychology, since a lot of Filipino youth nowadays cannot talk to their parents about gender and sexuality, what happens is that they learn they learn these topics from their circle of friends. So that's one of the benefits of having peers or circle of friends from your same age group, because you're going through the same crisis at different stages. Hence, you get informed about various things that you should know. Okay? However, I wouldn't say that that's the best source of information for everyone, especially if your peers are causing a negative influence to you. Hence, it's much better to discuss these things in the classroom, right? Next. What are the factors affecting human attraction? Later, I will attempt to explain that using different lenses. But I think not all of you are familiar with the evolutionary perspective, so I would like to talk about that later on. And different things related to gender and sexuality. In this lesson, we aim to discuss the following. We're going to talk about the human sexual behavior, the human sexual response, and sexual orientations. And then, in doing so, we're going to adopt physical, psychological, and cultural lenses to consider factors from various fields in explaining gender and sexuality. Okay, so I won't just present this topic from one point of view, but rather we're going to consider the what other fields have to say about this topic. So let us start. First, let me begin by talking about human sexuality from the historical perspective, and you will see that along the way, our views of gender and sexuality have changed for the better. Okay, but this discussion will allow you to trace some of the behaviors that we have today to the past. It allows you to understand why do we adapt such beliefs, such behaviors, and others. Okay, so first let me start in the ancient Greece. So in ancient Greece, they had a belief that men should be the dominant one in the society, and the male symbol is the symbol of fertility. On the other hand, women were considered as mere objects to be possessed, just like a property. Okay, a man can buy a house, a man can have slaves. Okay, and ultimately they can also possess a woman like an object. So you will see how different the society now in compared to how the society viewed women back then. Okay, women, unlike men, were not allowed to own properties and they had no legal rights. Unlike today that we push for equality and some groups push for feminism, okay? Back then it was it was viewed that women are supposed to be inferior in comparison to men. Okay? And that explains a lot of our beliefs that we have carried on until today. Back then, if women were not allowed to work, women were not allowed to have their own property, then what is their role in the society? Okay? Their role in the society in the ancient Greece is to have kids and to take care of these kids. Okay, so that's their only role, to be a mother to the kids of the family. Okay, and to take care of their offspring. So the role of the women back then is so demeaning. Okay, it's discriminating. So we had to take some necessary steps along the way so that we can empower women and there will be no biases, there will be no single gender must dominate the others. Then eventually, when we have reached the Middle Ages, as you know, during this time the church was very active, but not like today that the church is responsible. Back then, some leaders of the church were very irresponsible, and some of them are corrupt. Okay, very corrupt, and they use their power to influence people. Okay, and back then, during the Middle Ages, the church decreed that all sexual acts that do not lead to procreation were considered evil. Okay, so that's the reason why. Okay, things that behaviors that do not lead to procreation, like for example, even in our society, older individuals, they don't like to see younger ones holding hands in public. They don't like seeing people displaying affection in public. They don't like kissing in public. Okay, because they think that all sexual acts that do not lead to procreation is not good. It's undesirable. Okay, and we are so conservative because we endorse such beliefs. And back then, okay, even until now, okay, we have an image that a woman should be someone who knows how to behave properly to conform to to the standards of the society. Even back then, during the Middle Ages, women were labeled either as a temptress or a woman of virtue. In other words, you're considered either as a Mary or as an Eve. Well, by saying that, if you're labeled like Eve, then you're like a temptress. Okay? But if you're labeled as a Mary, then you are a woman of virtue. Okay? That's why we pay so much attention to the purity of women because of the influence because of the biblical influence. That back then, Mary's purity was viewed as something as saintly or desirable. Hence, the society has reached a standard wherein we aim to maintain the purity of people, but more specifically of women. Okay, and I hope that you became more conscious about the roots of the behaviors we've had, and you were able to trace it to the Middle Ages. Okay, there are a lot of things that happen in the Middle Ages, even in the field of psychology. Um, the church is very powerful. Like back then, if you have a mental illness, you will be labeled as a witch. And if you were labeled as a witch during the Middle Ages, what they do is that they torture the witch or they kill the witch. Okay? So think about it. Back then, if you have mental illness, you're also considered a witch, hence you will be sentenced to death. However, we know that if you're someone with mental illness, you're not necessarily a witch. You're not possessed by the evil. Okay, so there are a lot of people who were killed because they were labeled as evil by the society. I wonder, what are the punishments they had for people who engage in sexual acts? Okay, and I think there are a lot of torture equipments back in the Middle Ages, okay, that were used to punish people if they were considered evil. During the 16th century, meaning these are the years in between, from 1501 to 1600. Okay, what happened is that there was a Protestant Reformation, and then there were movements against the Catholic Church. Okay, if you want a refresher about this, I suggest going back to your history course, okay, or searching about it in the internet. It was believed, Protestantism believed that sexuality is a natural part of life and that priests should be able to marry. So in this movement, we see that people are starting to become more open about gender and sexuality, okay, especially with priests. Okay, so they do believe that just like other men in the society, priests can also have their own family. Okay, other than that, they also believe that sexual intimacy that does not necessarily lead to procreation is not necessarily evil because it has other roles, such as they believe that sexual intimacy strengthens the bond or the connection between the couple. Okay, hence they believe that sexual intimacy, which does not lead to procreation, is not necessarily evil. It's not necessarily a sin. So we can see that at this point in time, there were also people who had an opposing view compared to what is considered normal back then. And we should be thankful to these movements. Because of these movements, we became more open about topics of gender and sexuality. During 17th and the 18th century, a group called the Puritans. These are people who were discontented with the Church of England, okay, and they rallied for religious, moral, and societal reformation. And in their movement, they considered sexual acts outside marriage as a sin. Hence, this is one of the movements that made us think that premarital sex is considered immoral. Okay, hence it was condemned by the society. That's why we try as much as possible to not engage in such. Okay, so now you can see why is it that we hold on to certain beliefs even in the present. During the Victorian era in 1837 to 1901, okay, this was the time of Sigmund Freud. Okay, homosexuality and prostitution were considered to be threats to social order. Okay, so there were homosexuality and prostitution were rampant, and sometimes because they are considered to be threats to social order, they were labeled as mentally ill, or sometimes the society had negative opinions about both homosexuality and prostitution. And this was also the time that Freud's psychoanalytic theory became famous, hence people became more conscious about their sexual drives. Okay? And as you know it, Freud's theory was not well received by his colleagues, and there were a lot of psychological theories that emerged in response to his theory. Okay? And other than that, another highlight from this era is that it was believed that women should not enjoy sexual activity because if they enjoy it, then there's something wrong with them. And on the other hand, for men, it was believed that ejaculating for more than once a month weakens a man. Okay, hence it must be avoided so that a man would maintain his strength. Now let's move on to biological perspective. And from the biological perspective, we have two kinds of sex characteristics, which are primary and secondary. When we say primary sex characteristics, this talks about the sex organs that are present at birth and directly involved with human reproduction. So you're born with your sex organs. So those are the primary sex characteristics. On the other hand, when we say secondary sex characteristics, these are sexual organs or traits that develop at puberty and are indirectly involved in human reproduction. And secondary sex characteristics play a role in attraction as well from a biological and evolutionary standpoint. So, what are the changes in the secondary sex characteristics for both males and females? First, for males, what happens is that our voice become lower, okay? And there's hair growth on chest, face, underarms, legs, and the pubic area, and there's an increase in muscle mass. On the other hand, for female, the breast enlarge, there's hair growth in the underarms and in the pubic area, and the hip widens. And for both genders, skin becomes more oily and pores enlarge. And of course, there are other changes in the adolescence stage that happens, not just physical but also psychological, especially cognitive. Okay, when you are in the adolescent stage, you are more likely to be impulsive because your frontal lobe in the brain, the part of the brain in charge of decision making, is not yet fully developed, but your other areas are developing. Hence, people are more likely, or specifically adolescents are more likely to engage in risky behaviors. For example, trying certain drugs or substances, being engaged in premarital sex, or other risky behaviors because their sensation-seeking parts of the brain is telling them to engage in such, but the part of the brain in charge of decision-making, reasoning, and logic is not yet fully mature. And this is expected to mature around early 20s. That's why as people in their early 20s, how different are they now in comparison to who they were 10 years ago? Okay? And you will see that we realize that there are a lot of decisions that we regret, especially decisions that make us impulsive. For example, there are a lot of college students who would prefer going to parties rather than studying, or staying late at night to do risky behaviors. Okay, but when they get to early 20s, some people would prefer to work or to rest, okay, instead of doing other things that would not be considered a priority. Okay, so those are some changes that may influence how we engage in risky behaviors when we are in adolescence. Now that we have mentioned biological perspective, let's move on to the evolutionary perspective of human sexuality. Okay, so back then I mentioned to you that beauty is a virtue. It may also be a cultural standard. But from the perspective of evolutionary psychology, beauty is not just something that we use for attraction, but rather we prefer things, or we prefer people or animals. In the case of animals, they prefer mates who are considered beautiful because um, they it is an evolutionary standard. If you are together with a partner, for example, think of yourself as an animal right now, and you're looking for a partner, you will look for the best possible partner for you, because you want to survive, or you want to be able to have offsprings or children. Okay, because if you're going to be partners with someone who is, say for example, physically unhealthy or mentally unhealthy, then from the evolutionary standpoint, there's a lower chance for your kin to survive. Hence, it makes sense that we go for people who we think as physically attractive, because from the evolutionary standpoint, we also think that we are more likely to survive if we go for someone who is strong and someone who is capable of reproduction. Specifically, there's a preference for female with large breasts because such is connected with nutrition, okay? And we want our offspring to survive. That's why there's a preference for females with this characteristic. On the other hand, what females are looking for among males are broad shoulders, because by instinct, it was believed that if a man has broad shoulders, then he is also more likely to be physically healthy. Hence, your kin or your family is more likely to survive during the ancient times. Okay? Now let's adapt the psychological perspective of human sexuality. Okay, so when we say gender, okay, it's different to sex, because when we say sex, that talks about either male or female, biologically speaking. But when we say gender, it may include preference, it may include the LGBT, okay, it may include, so who do you want to be? Okay, we are now considering your choice, your preference, and what are the things that influence human sexuality, particularly gender. So first, we have here what we call gender roles. So there are cultural expectations that if you're a male, you should be the provider, while if you're a female, you are the one who nurtured the family. So what do you prefer? Do you want to be the provider or the one who nurtures the family? Okay. Other than that, as a kid, we experience gender typing. When we say gender typing, as we grow older, we learn from the society about the different expectations for the two genders, okay, or the various genders. Okay, so gender typing is the acquisition of knowledge about the different expectations that the society has about the various gender roles. And then eventually, we decide on our gender identity, or that's the sense of being male or female. And our sense of being male or female is influenced both by biology and environment. Okay? On the other hand, when we say, because gender is defined as the psychological aspect of being masculine or feminine, okay, influenced by culture, personality, and self-identity, influenced by three important factors. Biological factors, of course, if you're born to be a male, then that will also influence your preference to be a male, okay, and the other way around. Also, environmental influence, okay, and as well as culture, okay. So there are cultures who are more open to homosexuality, and they are more welcoming to the LGBT community, but I cannot say the same for other cultures or other religious orientations. Okay, so considering that, there may be some individuals who think they classify themselves in the LGBT community, but their culture or their religion will not welcome such idea. That's why their gender preference is that they would still express themselves as straights even though they are not. Okay? So there are various things to consider from the psychological standpoint of human sexuality known as gender. Okay, this time let's talk about the human sexual response cycle by Masters and Johnson, and this is both from the psychological and the biological perspective. And there are 5 stages of the cycle, but in some other sources they combine the first two and call it the excitement phase. Nonetheless, I'll discuss these 5. The first one is the desire phase, which is more psychological than physical, and is characterized by sexual cues and fantasies, which will eventually followed by physical changes in the body when you enter the arousal phase. Okay, and then you engage in the sexual behavior, and then eventually you will reach a climax. You will enter the plateau phase, and then that would be characterized by intense pleasure, and then eventually that will be the orgasm phase. And then after experiencing the climax of the sexual activity, you will reach what we call a resolution phase, or the decrease in arousal after the orgasm. This particularly happens in men, and this period is also known as the refractory period, wherein a person is not yet capable of engaging in such behavior for a certain period of time, and that extends as one grows older. Okay, that's why people who are in the later parts of their adulthood may have some problems in engaging in sexual behaviors. And that can be both psychological or biological. Psychological because of anxiety or because of worry about their performance or about their masculinity. Okay, and biological because there may be biological problems to begin with. So that's the human sexual response cycle. So now that we have been talking about the human sexual response cycle, let's move on to a related topic, which is love and attraction. And in this part of the lecture, let me talk about the different stages or types of love that a person may display. And let me begin that by talking about this theory by Helen Fisher and colleagues back in 1998. And according to them, there are 3 phases of romantic love, and these are the lust phase, attraction, and attachment. So according to them, attraction or love begins with an intense craving for a sexual contact, which is biologically natural for human beings, but eventually they learn that their attraction is not limited to sexual contact, because when they enter to attraction phase, they also are infatuated to each other, and they pursue a relationship with each other, and then eventually um, the infatuation fades, and then they will be in a deeper relationship with each other in the attachment phase. Okay, so this is where the relationship is getting tested. If will you stop in the lust phase, will you stop in the attraction phase, or will you be able to have a more secured relationship or long-term bond in the attachment phase? And attachment is influenced by a lot of things. Sometimes you're not aware that the type of person you're looking for, it may be related to to your preferences back in childhood. Say for example, you may be looking for someone who has a similar characteristic with someone in the family, or someone who is similar to you, or someone similar to a parent, someone similar to um, someone in the family. Okay, so there are a lot of things influencing our preferences, and in the attachment phase we have feelings of security, comfort, and emotional union with the partner. Now let's talk about another theory, and this time let's discuss John Lee's styles of love. And according to him, there are different styles of love characterized by different behaviors or different attitudes. So the first is what we call eros, and the eros is more like sexual and emotional love that happens at first in relationships. Okay, so it's important for partners to be able to make their way through eros and be able to have a long-term and deeper bond that is beyond sexual and emotional. Okay, but something built on friendship and long-term relationship. Okay, this is followed by what we call agape, and agape type of love is altruistic and selfless. When we say altruistic or altruism, it refers to behaviors that you do waiting for nothing in exchange. Okay, so this may happen among those, say for example, if they're married, however their partner is cheating, but they don't want to leave the relationship for the sake of their children. Okay, and they expect nothing in return for such, that they may be displaying agape. Or this can also happen among those who help other people. For example, love is not just something that you demonstrate to a partner, but also to, say for example, if you love children, then you can have, you can express helpfulness or helping behavior to other people and expect nothing in return. And one example of a person who displayed such love, it would be Mother Teresa. Okay? Then after that, we have what we call the storge. And in storge, this is a love-related friendship, okay, based on non-sexual affection. And the person experiences love as a gradual and slow process. Okay, and it's something that takes time, and their goals would be commitment, stability, and comfort. We also have what we call ludus, and when we say ludus, they think of relationship as just a game and it's not something serious, hence they don't feel jealousy about each other's behaviors. Okay, they don't have commitment nor intimacy. And believe it or not, jealousy has what we call explanations from evolutionary psychology, and jealousy is one of the basic emotions. And from the evolutionary standpoint, jealousy is important because we express jealousy because we don't want to lose a partner. Okay? Back then, during the time, just like what I've been telling you since earlier, imagine if you live during the time of Adam and Eve, then there are only few number of people in the world. Imagine if you're going to lose your partners. Um, you have to engage in behaviors that will aim to preserve the relationship. However, you don't want to be obsessive and possessive because that would be mania. Okay, wherein they easily get jealous and their experiences of love is out of control. Hence, ludus and mania may be connected to each other. So if they are in a relationship with someone who is ludic, then these people who display ludic love may take advantage of those who show manic love. Okay, so and other than that, there's also what we call pragma, which is practical types of lovers or business-like. Their commitment is not based on attraction, but rather it's based on what is appropriate. And if you're in pragma, then you're the type of lovers who plan about getting married, having children, and having plans for the future. Okay, and I hope that knowing these different types of love allowed you to understand why different people show different types of love to their partner, different behaviors in doing so. Now let's talk about Robert Sternberg's triangular theory of love, and one of the most famous theories in social psychology that explains the social psychology of attraction. And in order for us to understand this triangle, first let's talk about the three sides, which are intimacy, passion, and decision or commitment. When we say intimacy, this is a friendly attraction. Okay, but there's no desire for a long-term commitment, a friendly relationship. Okay, and it's all about emotional intimacy. On the other hand, when we say passion, this is more of physiological arousal. Okay, however, there is no commitment to the partner, and this is like love at first sight. On the other hand, when we say decision or commitment, also known as empty love, this is this is all about commitment, but there may be no intimacy and no passion. Say for example, couples staying together for their children, or in the case of in other cultures, two people may be promised to marry each other even though they did not give their consent in the arranged marriage. Hence, there is commitment, but there's no passion or intimacy. Now, these three can be combined into different possible combinations. So, intimacy and passion can be combined, and that would be called romantic love. And when we say romantic love, it's characterized by emotional intensity and sexual excitement. Okay, and this excitement may be positive or negative. Okay, and it happens a lot in the earlier phases of a relationship. After that, we have what we call companionate love. And in companionate love, this is composed of both being friendly and having a commitment to a partner. So this is a long, deeply committed friendship or marriage, but passion has faded. So it's more durable than romantic love and may grow over time. And also we have what we call fatuous love, characterized by passion and commitment. Okay, and infatuous love, they only spend a short time in courtship and suddenly, or they may decide early to get married. Okay, so what you want to achieve is somehow a combination of these three, known as consummate love, which is characterized by both intimacy, passion, and commitment. Okay, and this, according to Sternberg, this is the most ideal among the various types of love that he talked about. So basically, this part of our lecture closes our discussion about the different types of attraction and behaviors that we do, depending on the type of attraction that we display. And I hope you learned a lot, and I hope that you will have more understanding about your sexuality, gender, as well as in attraction.